It all started with a simple trip to the ATM. One afternoon, I was in my room studying when my mom called out to me. "Coming." I replied to her and then went downstairs to the kitchen. She asked me if I could withdraw some cash for her because apparently she needed it urgently. I just sighed and reluctantly agreed with it. Looking back now, I honestly think everything that happened was kinda my own fault. Not because I was doing anything illegal or that I trusted the wrong people, but my fault was that I became far too predictable. I put on my usual pair of sneakers, and then I headed out to withdraw the cash. It wasn't anything unusual, because unfortunately, it kinda had become one of my regular responsibilities around the house. For one reason or another, my family always seemed to need cash, whether it was just paying someone or buying groceries or running errands. I always ended up making the trip. So in a way, it eventually became kind of a routine. I would leave my house, walk 10 minutes to the same ATM. I would withdraw the money and then head straight back home. And I would do it all over again just a day or two later. At the time though, I never thought much about it. It was just me helping out my family, so I just pretty much considered it normal. But in order for you to fully understand my terrifying experience, there's two crucial details you need to hear. The first was the security guard. Right beside the ATM was the bank itself. And every single day, the same security guard stood outside the entrance. I always saw him, like every time I went there. He wasn't particularly old. He was probably in his early 40s. And after seeing me so many times, I think he had eventually started recognizing each other. But interestingly though, we never actually interacted. Sometimes we would glance at each other as I walked past him, but that was pretty much it. The second detail was the convenience store that stood beside the ATM. The owner of the store spent most of his days outside on a faded plastic chair, watching the road and occasionally serving the customers. He wasn't particularly friendly or unfriendly. I wouldn't know since I never interacted with him either. He was just there. Like the security guard, he slowly became one of the familiar faces that you kinda just stop paying attention to. But looking back now, I realized that that's exactly what made them so dangerous. I think I must have visited the ATM dozens of times over the next several weeks, but nothing ever happened and everything was pretty much normal. Until one afternoon. As I finished withdrawing the cash and started walking away, I noticed that the security guard was watching me. At first I didn't think much of it. I just assumed that he was bored. After all, standing outside a bank all day wasn't exactly the most exciting job in the world. I stuffed the cash into my pockets and then I started walking home. But just a few seconds later, for whatever reason, I turned around and I glanced behind me. The guard was still looking in my direction. For a moment, I got the feeling that he was looking at me. I wasn't sure though. It only lasted a moment before he turned away, so I just shrugged it off and kept walking. But it wasn't until I reached the end of the street that another thought crossed my mind. The shopkeeper. I realized that the shopkeeper had been watching me as well. It wasn't in an obvious way, just quietly watching. I remember I actually laughed at myself in that moment. I mean, they worked there. They had nothing better going on, so of course they'd be kinda looking around. I somehow convinced myself that I was overthinking things and just being silly for no reason. So I went about my day as usual and basically just forgot about it after that. And so over the course of next few days, life carried on exactly the same it always had. Every few days, I'd make the same walk to the ATM, withdraw whatever cash my family needed, and then head straight back home. Although I do admit that, after that strange afternoon, I found myself subconsciously paying a little more attention to the shopkeeper and the security guard. But as expected, nothing really happened. Everything looked exactly the same, so as the days passed by without anything unusual happening, I eventually just stopped thinking about it altogether. But I suppose that this is a reminder to myself and everyone that we shouldn't take our lives for granted. And we definitely shouldn't dismiss any red flags that we come across, no matter how safe we feel. But unfortunately, I was too careless at the time, because just a few days later, as I was walking home after making another trip to the ATM, I got this strange feeling that someone was walking behind me. It wasn't exactly anything I could explain, so I just casually looked over my shoulder, and I saw that there was a man that was walking behind me. He wasn't particularly close, and kinda simply appeared to be walking home just like everybody else. So in that brief moment, I thought nothing of it. But a few moments later, I crossed the street, and just out of habit, I glanced behind me again, and I noticed that the man had crossed the street as well. Again, it could have been just a coincidence. In fact, I convinced myself that it probably was. But truthfully speaking, that strange feeling stayed with me. And over the following week, little things like that kept happening. Sometimes I would notice the same motorcycle parked near the ATM. Or sometimes I would get this strange weird feeling that someone was watching me while I was walking home from school. But it was all very subtle. It wasn't too obvious. And so because of that, I just didn't think that something was actually happening. One night, as I was about to walk through the front door of my house, I turned around and just happened to look back toward the street. There was a silver car parked in the distance. There was nobody around it, and it was too far to tell who was sitting inside. But the strangest part was, the moment I stepped forward and stared directly at it, the car engine abruptly started, and it slowly pulled away before disappearing around the corner. I stood there for several seconds, watching the tail lights slowly fade away. But then I just shook my head and quietly laughed at myself. You're seriously getting paranoid again. I just dismissed it and went inside, locking the front door behind me. But little did I know, someone had just confirmed exactly where I lived. And 2 days later, it all came crashing down. It was a Saturday morning. My parents were actually getting ready to leave for the weekend to visit a few relatives. And naturally, since they were young, my younger brother and sister were going with them, which meant that I was basically home alone for the weekend. It wasn't anything unusual since I had been home alone plenty of times before, and I was kinda stoked about it anyways. My parents left early in the morning, so I locked the front door behind them and went back to my room to relax and enjoy the weekend by myself. I had recently bought a PlayStation, so I spent most of the day doing exactly what you would expect, just playing video games. Hours passed by without even me noticing, and at some point, I think I actually fell asleep on the couch with the controller still in my hands. I woke up and it was around 8 p.m. I lazily rubbed my eyes and looked around the room. It was kinda surprising how long I had actually slept. I got up from the couch and made my way downstairs toward the kitchen, still half asleep. I was starving, so I made myself something to eat before heading back upstairs to my bedroom. I had a habit of listening to music a lot. It was actually something I did every night. So after finishing my food, I just put on my headphones, I laid back on the couch, and started scrolling my phone while my playlist played in the background. Being an introvert, I never really minded spending hours alone by myself. In fact, I kinda preferred it that way. And so without even realizing it, another couple hours passed by. I remember checking the time. It was exactly 10 p.m. I removed my headphones to take a quick breather and grabbed my charger from the other side of the room. And that's when I heard it. A dull thud. It sounded like something heavy had fallen outside. I paused for a second and just looked outside the bedroom window. Nothing. Just the sound of my PlayStation running in the background and just pitch darkness outside the window. I just shrugged it off. One of the neighbors was probably doing something. I put my headphones back in and went back to listening to music. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification. I paused the music again. Silence. Then I heard it. A faint metallic scraping sound, almost like something was being dragged against our front gate. I walked into the hallway and looked around. Nothing. Just silence. I'm just being paranoid again. So I went back to my room. I had barely sat down on the couch when I heard another sound. It wasn't subtle. It was a loud bang. It wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from downstairs, inside the house. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I slowly removed my headphones, and for the first time, I clearly heard it. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate footsteps. Someone was moving through the house. I froze. I thought it could be my parents, but that was impossible. They would have called me if they were coming back early. They didn't. Instead, the footsteps just continued. I quietly moved toward my bedroom window and listened. Checked the basement. My stomach dropped. There was more than one of them. I couldn't believe this was actually happening right now. I locked the bedroom door and quietly backed away from it. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but I realized something terrifying. My phone wouldn't turn on. The battery was dead. I was all alone, with no way of contacting my family or the police. I could still hear them downstairs. Furniture being moved around, drawers and cupboards being frantically opened and closed. They were robbing the place. I knew it was only a matter of time before they finally came upstairs and realized that I was hiding here. So in that moment, I made a conscious decision. I honestly don't know where the courage for that came from, but I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped outside. I looked around, and a cold chill ran down my spine. A dark figure was standing just a few feet from me, on the top of the stairs. I'll go check the bedrooms. I almost threw up when I heard that. I had to do something, otherwise I was done for. He began walking toward the bedrooms, and I saw that another one had came up right behind him. I took one last look. I took a deep breath, and then I bolted straight out of the bedroom toward the narrow hallway. and burst into the master bedroom. I heard people cussing and shouting and heavy footsteps echoing through the entire house. Adrenaline can honestly make you do things that you normally wouldn't even think about doing. I locked the door shut and ran across the room toward the wooden closet. I searched like a maniac for it until I finally got my hands on it. It was a Winchester shotgun. My father had taught me how to use it, but I never thought that I would actually be using it in a situation like this, especially in my home. I heard a loud bang on the door. They were trying to kick the door open. I loaded the round in the gun as fast as I could. The next kick nearly ripped the door off its hinges. Wood splintered across the room. I raised the shotgun up, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I've called the police," I yelled out to them, but nobody answered. The next kick blew the door half open. Another shadow appeared behind the cracked door. That was it. I pressed the trigger. The blast echoed through the entire house. For a second, everything went dead silent. There was not a single noise. Then I heard footsteps, heavy footsteps, thundering down the stairs. The front door slammed open, and a car engine roared through life outside. They were gone, just as fast they had came in. The shotgun slipped out of my hands, and I hit the floor as my legs gave out beneath me. This was the scariest moment of my life. I stayed on the bedroom floor until I heard sirens approaching in the distance. It seemed like somebody had reported the gunshot. And only a few seconds later, police officers rushed into the house and carefully escorted me outside. They ended up searching the entire house, top to bottom. Obviously, those people had ran away by this point. The officers discovered that every room had been turned upside down. The place was practically destroyed. Drawers had been empty and cupboards had been torn apart, and the furniture had been moved around. This wasn't some random break-in. They knew what they were looking for. The police collected fingerprints and photographed pretty much everything, and took the recordings from the security cameras around our street. It took a very long time, but obviously it makes sense. This was quite literally a crime scene. And you could pretty much figure out what the reaction of my parents would be. They were naturally horrified. I don't think I've ever seen them that shaken. But that wasn't even the real shocker, because the real shocker came 1 week later. The detective that was handling the case called us to the police station. He placed several printed photographs on the table in front of me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But then, I recognized the first face. It was the security guard from the ATM. My heart immediately started racing. The detective slid another photograph toward me. And it was the shopkeeper. The same man who had sat outside the convenience store every single day. For several seconds, I couldn't get a word out. I just stared at their faces. The detective quietly explained to me that both men had been arrested, along with another accomplice, after the investigators connected them to several home invasion robberies across the entire city. According to the investigation, these people spent weeks watching people who regularly visited the ATM. They learned their routines. They followed them home. They watched who they lived with and when they left home. And eventually, they chose the day to strike. When I heard that, every single strange feeling that I had ignored up until that point, it all made sense. The motorcycle, the parked car, the random feeling of being watched. All those things that I had carelessly dismissed. None of it had been my imagination. The scariest part wasn't that someone had actually broken into our house. It was realizing that they had probably been studying my life long before I even knew they existed. Even now, whenever I walk past an ATM, I can't help but wonder who's watching me, and whether they're just another stranger or someone who's quietly learning my routine.